Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. The division championship Minnesota Twins are looking to go all the way to the World Series in 2024. Bolstered by inspirational shortstop Carlos Correa, a healthy Brian Buxton, and rookie phenom Royce Lewis, plus a pitching staff led by Pablo Lopez and an outstanding bullpen featuring Johan Duran, the Twins are the best bargain in the major leagues, and Target Field is the best venue in baseball. Sheridan Dulas & Kins, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm, has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News and World Report every year since 2009, Sheridan Dulas & Kins are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Steve Francisco. It's an honor and a pleasure to welcome back to our studio today our good friend, retired Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson. Justice Anderson, welcome back to Access to Democracy.
Always a pleasure, sir.
And our viewers...
Have you got good questions?
Oh, I have very good questions, I think.
Okay, I'm
well,
ready.
I'll let you be the judge of that. Our viewers may recognize you because occasionally you do host some of our programs, too.
I have done that.
And you will be in the future as well.
I'm hoping to get we talked about a couple of
Right.
guests. I won't give their names.
No, we'll keep it a surprise. So let's jump right into it because we have a lot of ground to cover in a short time. The Trump administration is moving rapidly to terminate thousands of federal workers. They are moving to abolish entire departments of the federal government and agencies that were created by the Congress, the elected representatives of the people. They are withholding spending money that has been appropriated by Congress. Dozens of lawsuits have been filed by numerous organizations and individuals. My question to you, sir, are we in the midst of a constitutional crisis in America?
Absolutely, yes.
Why do you say that?
It's got a lot of history to it. If you look at what our founders created, it's not the best form of government, but it's better than the others, okay? But we have three branches: the legislative, executive, and judiciary. The founders planned for the legislative to be the most powerful, pass the laws, executive implement the laws, and for the judiciary to interpret those laws. And I'll talk about what Alexander said, is that the judiciary needs to serve as a bulwark against the ill humors, which he said may exist and arise from the society itself. So why are we where we are? The legislature is dysfunctional. It's abdicated its power and authority
To the executive.
Well, they've left a vacuum, and power abhors the vacuum. And the executive, Trump in particular, has moved into it. So when they don't do their job, then the other branches try to fill the vacuum. Now, there are a couple of things as a result of that. You have someone like Trump, who's autocratic in his mindset. He'll go in and take whatever power he has. Second, issues that should be resolved in the legislature sometimes get pushed over to the courts. And that's why we now have dysfunctional legislature, power-grabbing executive and the courts trying to act, and you have a conflict. You're seeing it every day between the executive and the judiciary.
Now, you spoke just a moment ago about the power of the courts to interpret what the law is. Our viewers may hear this term a lot in the news or read about it in the newspaper, this term judicial review. Say just a word more about what is judicial review?
It's a long-time practice in the United States, first established by Marshall in Marbury versus Madison. He said that the courts have the ability to review the actions of both the legislature and the executive to make sure that they conform with the fundamental principles of the Constitution. Now, Marshall said courts should do that review. Never in a doubtful case should the court say that the other branch does not have that power. But when it is clear, the court has the obligation to step up and say, no, you don't have that power.
I have a quote here from the famous case which every first-year law student, I was in law school a long time ago as you were, and I remember this quote from Marbury versus Madison, 1803.
Yes.
It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. But President Trump and many of his supporters are saying something quite different. The president is saying, I will tell you what the law is. Does this contribute to your view that that's why we're in a crisis, a constitutional crisis?
That is exactly the definition of why we're in the crisis, because we have a president who does not understand what the mandate from our founders was and the way government is supposed to work. He wants to take all the power to himself, and he wants to ignore the judiciary.
What do you say, Paul, when people say to you, you know, this is not the first time we've seen a very assertive executive, an assertive president. President Lincoln, during the American Civil War, suspended the writ of habeas corpus. He had political opponents who were sympathetic to the Confederacy arrested, sometimes held without charge. What do you say, and during the Great Depression, President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, assumed great powers and was struck down by the court a couple of times, but still there are times where you see power ebb and flow. So what is different about this time from those? Is there a difference?
Yes. We have a public that is apathetic, or even worse, is willing to go along and empower Trump. And it's a crazy thing to see how my college professor said that our greatest enemy is not going to be external. It's going to be internal. And it's come from the people themselves who are willing to abdicate their sovereign authority, which they have under the Constitution, and turn it over to someone, a dictator or an autocrat like Trump. See, I got to be very careful here, but I'm thinking of doing an editorial. And the title of that editorial is "We Need a Revolution."
Oh my goodness.
Now, wait a minute.
You're using the R word here.
I know, and I'll probably have Trump come after me.
Explain that.
But it's a revolution under our Constitution.
Yeah.
It's not the revolution. You know, Jefferson said the tree of liberty needs to be nourished by the blood of patriots every 20 years or so. No. We have institutionalized revolution. It's called elections. And the people have to understand that they have this revolutionary power. They can eliminate the dysfunction that exists. And that revolution has to happen in 2026.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of the president's attacks on judges who have issued opinions and decisions with which he disagrees? He has even attacked a federal judge as a Mexican. It happened to be a federal judge who actually was born in the United States in Indiana, but was of Mexican heritage. And then we see this significant increase in threats against our judges at both the federal and even at the state level.
He's acting like a petulant child. I mean, he does not like to have somebody say he can't do this or can't do that. And he's gotten away with so much historically.
But when a president or anybody disagrees with the opinion of a court, a lower court, they have a remedy, right? It's called the
lower
appellate
court, they
process.
get to appeal.
Right.
And he controls the U.S. Supreme Court. But he just does not honor and appreciate the fundamental principles of our Constitution, separation of powers, and that he's not all-powerful. And that's why I say the people have to take the power back. It's not going to happen any other place. And now the people say, no, we are sovereign. And good example, conservative, West Central Minnesota guy, Trump supporter, goes in and doing his taxes, and he really blows the mind of his tax preparer. He says, you know what they want to do? They want to take my free speech away from me. That guy starts to get it. And so the public has to get what's going on and say, no, we are a wonderful country. We are a great country, and we got to act to preserve that.
But we've had this ability over nearly 250 years of our national existence to correct errors. And what you're saying is that ultimately it is the ballot box, it is the integrity of our electoral process that allows us to make course corrections, basically. And you are advocating for that in these circumstances.
Yes.
I want to ask you about a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case. We're not just going to talk about federal courts, we're going to talk about state courts.
Well, I want to talk about state courts.
We will, but first I want to ask you about a landmark decision that was rendered last July 1st, a date which I think will go down in judicial infamy, if I may give my opinion. Trump versus United States, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the president has absolute immunity for official acts within the president's exclusive authority. I'm quoting from the opinion. Now, that exclusive authority, a few of the things that includes is the power to pardon, command of the military, execution of the laws. Isn't this opinion giving him absolute immunity a radical expansion of presidential authority?
Well, let's start with the premise that Supreme Courts are not always right. They're last. And we need to understand that. They get it wrong. They got it wrong in the Dred Scott case. They got it wrong in the civil rights cases of the 1880s, Plessy versus Ferguson. So the courts get it wrong. That is a very ill-advised opinion. And
courts are human institutions.
Oh, yes.
They make mistakes too.
And humans have different perspectives on power and whatever. And unfortunately, this court is too willing, and I hate to use a Chinese term here in light of the trade war, but they're too willing to kowtow to Trump. They appear intimidated by him, and they should have stood up.
Well, he appointed the majority that exists on the court right now, but they don't always rule in his favor, right? There have been a couple of opinions recently where they're sort of moving in a little bit different direction.
You've got three justices who are absolutely going to always be on Trump's side. Thomas, I've had dinner with Thomas. I know he's an angry person.
Clarence Thomas.
Yeah.
Samuel
and then you got
Alito.
Alito, he's probably the most dangerous. And then you got Gorsuch, okay? Then you have Kavanaugh, who I would describe as can be persuaded, but not persuasive. He's not as strong ideologically as the others. The two key votes on the court as far as protecting democracy are going to be Roberts and Barrett.
Amy Coney Barrett, who is the newest, Ketanji Brown Jackson's the newest member, but she was previous.
But you see, I disagree jurisprudentially with Roberts almost all the time, but he's a principled, honest justice, and he is seeing what's going to happen here. Barrett, to my surprise, is also willing to be persuaded. But she is very conservative and will often side with the conservatives. So we have this danger. Okay, I'm going to back up. One of the founders, Alexander Hamilton, when talking about the judiciary, I talk about the judiciary is supposed to protect against the ill humors that emerge in society themselves. I would make a impression that Trump is one of those ill humors. But the court does not seem willing to stand up as a bulwark in many instances with respect to that ill humor, Trump. And that's what this case is about. The immunity case, they didn't stand up for the Constitution.
Well, I want to ask you to delve into this a little more detail, because it strikes me that the reasoning in Trump versus U.S., this landmark ruling on presidential immunity, they say Congress has no power whatsoever to regulate his exclusive authority. Now, one of those powers he has is the power to pardon. It cannot be undone by Congress. Nobody can do it. It's, if you will, an absolute power. Does that mean that a president could say, I'll grant you a pardon if you give me a check for $100,000?
Yes.
That's what I was afraid
Yeah, and that's
afraid of, if you follow this reasoning.
But you talked about the other three areas that they talked about.
The military, how about that's a power?
Yeah.
The president is the commander-in-chief.
Yeah.
What if he commits the United States to basically an illegal military action, an unprovoked invasion of a foreign country? Talking about a hypothetical.
You have to depend on the higher authority that the military is answerable to, the Constitution and the people. And so in that situation, you have to hope that the military will say, no, we can't do that.
Actually, doesn't the Uniform Code of Military Justice, my understanding is that the president is the commander-in-chief, but you are obligated not to follow an illegal order, that the Constitution is over any president. Am I not correct about that?
You got it exactly correct. Now, I'm going to go back. There's too many parallels I see right now with what happened in Nazi Germany. And you know that one of the judges at Nuremberg was a Minnesota judge, Billy Christensen.
Yeah.
And I've just revisited the movie Judgment at Nuremberg. And the defense was, I was following orders. So if you got a real bad order, a lesser order, they say, well, I did the lesser evil. No. You have to make a choice. You can't choose between the greater evil and the lesser evil. Sometimes you have to say, I will not do either evil.
Right.
And we got to hope that the military will understand that and stand up to illegal authority when it...
And our military, we should remember, when they take the oath, I've had relatives, you have too. My father served in the U.S. Air Force during the Korean conflict. When he took his oath to serve, you take an oath to the Constitution, not to any president. The president is your commander-in-chief, but the oath is to the Constitution of the United States.
But let's get to that third pillar of the immunity case. What he said, that he has the power to implement the laws.
Yeah.
That's where they really went wrong. See, the legislature has the power, and he cannot interpret what the legislature does contrary to what his action was. But that's what he's doing, see? And so, of course, that's where the courts have to come in and say, no, that's not what the legislature intended. It said you don't get to do that. And you are not immune from not following what the Constitution says and the legislature says. And so that's where they made a big mistake, and they just basically open up the doors for the president to say, well, I'm president, I can do whatever I want.
These cases are, we should say, a lot of these questions we're discussing are going to have ended up before the federal courts, and several of them are already moving on up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So we're going to see what they say, but it really struck me as a remarkable thing to watch the president and Elon Musk unilaterally decide one day that they were going to abolish the U.S. Agency for International Development that provides millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars a year in foreign assistance to some of the world's poorest people, and that they thought they could do that without even consulting Congress that created USAID.
This is, again, Congress created USAID. Right. They fund. Now, they listen to what the president says about funding, but the funding comes
from Congress.
It's a dictatorial act. I'm going to just put it right out there. He doesn't have that power and authority. There are ways that he can do it if he wants to do it under the Constitution, but he just can't do it unilaterally. And he's doing that across the board.
Right.
I mean, this guy has autocratic, dictatorial aspirations, and we just have to realize it. I'm sorry, I mean, it's just so clear from what he's doing.
I want to ask you about a couple of cases that are in the news a lot these days. We see the government moving toward deportation of people in the country in an undocumented status. They are here, the administration says they are here illegally. We have the right to remove them. There is a recent case, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was living in Michigan, and on March 15th, the U.S. government arrested and deported him to a Salvadoran prison. It turns out the government later admitted, we made a mistake. We deported somebody who was not deportable, but now the administration says we can't do anything about that. We cannot bring him back because he is beyond the jurisdiction of a U.S. court. What's going on here? If you sent him there, can't you bring him back as a lower federal court judge has ordered? And the Supreme Court just said you have to bring him back?
You use the pronoun you. Who are you referring to and say you can bring him back?
Yeah, the government.
The government,
right.
Okay. The government can bring him back. Well, it's not as simple as you say it, because they committed an illegal act. He was here legally, they deported him.
That the government committed an illegal act.
The government committed, it's an ill humor, okay, right there. And, but you turned him over to a sovereign nation, El Salvador. Now, granted, we're trying to treat Central America as Serbian states, whatever, but no, we have to recognize the sovereignty of this independent state. And a lot of people are giving a Supreme Court a hard time for its use of the term facilitate.
The court said that they have to facilitate his return to the U.S., but they set no timeline on that.
See, the problem is the Supreme Court does not have the power and authority to tell El Salvador to get him back here by midnight tomorrow.
So I want to pose a hypothetical to you. We remember our days in law school. Professors love talking, and judges love talking about hypotheticals. Let's say the United States government makes a mistake and they deport a United States citizen, somebody who is a U.S. citizen entitled to be here. They make a mistake and they deport them to a foreign prison, El Salvador or anywhere else.
Or Russia.
Or Russia. Are you saying, if I understand you, you're saying then the government is making this argument that we can't bring them back because we made a mistake?
Well, no, it's not that you can't bring them back.
That they choose not to.
They have to choose to bring them back, but they have to follow international law and diplomatic procedure. So getting Garcia back is within the power of the executive to act. And the State Department is going to have to say, hey, we made a mistake, we're embarrassed, would you please help us correct that mistake? And I'm pretty sure you do it that way, El Salvador is going to do it.
I don't think that most Americans have any problem with the idea that if you are in this country, you are not a citizen, but you are here on a visa or some legal status, that if you commit a crime in the United States, a serious crime, that visa can be revoked and you can be removed. That's not what the Garcia case is.
No, that's not what the Garcia case is.
And it's also not the case with other cases where the government is now going after people who have participated in protests about the civil rights of Palestinians in the Middle East and Gaza in particular, and criticizing Netanyahu. Now, the Secretary of State and President Trump have broadly branded these people as Hamas sympathizers, as supporting terrorists in our midst. What do you make of those arguments?
They're wrong. Absolutely, unequivocally wrong.
Why are they wrong?
Because we have the right to peaceably express our opinions in the United States. There are many people...
That free speech applies not just to U.S. citizens, but to anybody legally in the country.
Bingo. We have much case law that says the Constitution does not only apply to citizens, it applies to people who are legally in the United States. If you have a legal visa, you have a green card,
right.
You're here legally, and that means you are entitled to all of the due process guarantees of the Constitution. And you cannot have a president or somebody else act arbitrarily to deny you the rights that you have. Constitution, the Supreme Court has ruled that under the Constitution.
But Secretary of State Rubio, in the case of Mr. Khalil, who I believe was at Columbia University in New York, he said, Secretary of State Rubio, quote, we have the right to remove them because, quote, potentially serious adverse consequences that would compromise a compelling U.S. foreign policy interest. So in this case, and in others, the government is not necessarily required to prove that they committed a crime, but they are able to apply this, it strikes me as a very arbitrary standard, which really comes down to speech that an administration doesn't like.
I'm going to step back a little bit here. I've talked to some of my colleagues who become on the Supreme Court and what it's like. And it's just, well, I was at a ceremony yesterday and I talked to one. I said, you know, you did not realize what a extended understanding of the Constitution and the rights that would happen as you became a member of the court and have to interpret the Constitution. It happened to me. I mean, it took a while for me to fully understand how I saw this document and interpreted it, okay? But we're human, but it's there, and it needs to be interpreted. And the problem we have is that people in power now do not understand that document in its fullest extent, the way it protects the rights of people. You know, it's very hard. Some people do some nasty things, and they say some nasty things. But, you know, we have the right to speak in this country. I've had to rule on cases that, yeah, gosh, this is really weird. But, you know, it's within the boundaries of what our Constitution says.
And a lot of times it seems in First Amendment cases, if you really believe in free speech, you're going to have to stand up to defend the right of free speech of people that you may vehemently disagree with. It's not popular speech. It's going to be unpopular speech.
I mean, I've ruled in those cases.
Right.
It's terribly unpopular. But I think, I forget the name of the editorial, he was with the Emporia paper out in Kansas, to say that the thing is about free speech, we have to guarantee it. Because without free speech, good ideas will not flourish, and bad ideas will not be exposed, so they will wither and die in front of you because of their own lack of credibility. Free speech will do that.
Former Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson, we did not get to the state courts. We're going to have you back because we got to most of what we wanted to cover. Thank you again for coming to Access to Democracy.
This is a time of opportunity for state courts. We'll talk about that.
Thank our viewers for watching Access to Democracy.